And we're back live. And we have a big and very good panel, so we had a few extra minutes to get them all in on the spot. And I will introduce them in the order of speaking. So first I have Mikael Damberg. Mikael Damberg, you are the former finance minister and also now vice chair of the Parliamentary Committee for Finance. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Edward Riedel, you are the chair of that committee in the parliament. And it's also your friends in government who are in the finance department who are responsible for these issues at the moment. And Claes-Mikael Ståhl, you're a vice general secretary for the European Trade Union Confederation, the ETUC. Warm welcome here.
Thank you very much.
And Séverine Picard, you are a tax expert, and you're also a coordinator for a network of trade unions that organize around this issue.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And Elinor Oderberg, you are the chief economist for the think tank Arena, Arena Idea, a progressive think tank here in Sweden, who's been vocal on these issues as well. And last but not least, Göran, you introduced yourself before, but you are the president of SACO. So welcome everyone. And the plan for today here is that I give each of you 5 minutes from the questions around the general topic, and then we will have a discussion where I have some follow-up questions, and you know the rules. So Michael, please, when you see this report and the figures, what do you think?
First of all, thank you very much also to SACO for introducing this debate in Sweden. I think we haven't really had a big debate on these issues in Sweden, and this is a big thing, both globally and in Europe right now. And to start from a different perspective, Sweden is a relatively small country, only 10 million people, with a large impact in the world. We have huge corporates, companies working all over the globe, a huge export industry. Half of the Swedish GDP is export. So for us, an open economy, these issues are very relevant. That's why we in Sweden, with different governments, have always been also looking at the corporate taxation system in Sweden to have it being competitive. So it is still a tax base, but still in a competitive way in a global perspective, so we can also develop our industry in the long term. But I must say that this negotiations in the OECD and the G20 was a big success. There's been a debate for a very long time that some countries are actually using taxation as a mean for introducing tax avoidance, tax evasions, to actually heading a debate that actually can result to a race to the bottom when it comes to taxation. That's no one stand to gain from that. So I think this was a global success to actually introduce this kind of agreement. And now for Europe to introduce it, I think it's good if we make a common agenda on this and actually have joint decisions, so we don't have different playing fields inside the European Union. I think that's a great advantage. I found it interesting to see the different numbers on Sweden. Actually, I must follow up that a bit to see how have we calculated the results of taxation different from other bodies and other organizations. But in the long run, it's not, I think, the revenues that are the big thing here. It is, again, to avoid tax evasion globally, to actually see the big picture. OECD, I think, calculated $150 billion is lost by this system today. And I think that's the big picture. And that, I think, Sweden stand to gain if we raise the floor and actually have a relatively better position afterwards than before. I think that's the big gain from a Swedish perspective. Although I must say, when we implement these rules, it will be important to also, in the long run, look at how is the rule made out? How complicated is it? How much administration and burden will there be when you implement these kind of systems? Because I think with the large corporations in Sweden, they will have some jobs to do to actually fulfill their new obligations. Although if everyone does it, it's not as big thing, but of course that's a big thing for the companies themselves. But in the big picture, I think that was a great success. I think we should keep the pressure up to actually also deliver on the results in the OECD and the common framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Keep the pressure up. And Edward, what are your thoughts on this?
We have one microphone.
Yes.
Thank you for the invitation first.
Uh, I will try to do my best in English, so you have to keep up. Some words I may invent during the course of the day, but I'll do my best. I do not think we have a lot of differences in Sweden in regard of how we see this, actually. I think a lot of the pros and the cons are looked similarly, regardless of what party we represent in the Swedish context. And I think this is a good thing to avoid a race to the bottom in terms of corporate tax. We can see within the EU, we have a country near Great Britain that are using this possibility to have low corporate tax as a way to attract companies in that sense. And actually, the current Swedish corporate tax has been lowered in several steps. So we are a bit higher than the floor, but the taxation of corporate earnings is still high in the European standard, but lower than before. When we see together with the capital gain taxes and the income tax many small business owners have to pay, this has a negative effect on entrepreneurship and on Sweden's international competitiveness. Even towards other countries in the European Union. Other issues is that the tax system is overly complicated, leading to administrative burden, which this proposed new tax harmonization won't help with. Actually, that's one of the big problems, actually, that will be a lot of bureaucracy in the companies that are now the 100 plus 20 companies in Sweden that will be affected in the second pillar. They will have a lot of new bureaucracy burdens in regard to that. This new harmonization will have some benefits for the Swedish tax system, and it will decrease the incentives to move corporations from Sweden to countries with lower corporate tax, and that is a good thing. We had a lot of problems in the 1980s, and actually one decade before that, a lot of big Swedish owner and companies left Sweden, and the tax base got a little smaller, and that's a problem. I think I will come back later during this debate, but it's a good thing that we can have a floor, and I think that will help countries like Sweden, and the corporate tax race to the bottom hopefully will end with this new legislation, and that's a good thing for us.
Thank you so much. And Klaus Mikael, what's your European perspective on this?
Yeah, my European.
When you hear this,
could I use this one, or it's not working?
Yeah, you get the thumbs up from producer.
It's working. Good, very good. So yes, a European perspective on this. Well, actually, I was going to take a trade union perspective.
That's even better.
And the trade union perspective is that what we're discussing here is very similar to the basic issues that we face as trade unions. How to deal with the insiders and outsiders. How do you make it less profitable to be outside and more profitable to be inside a regulation, a collective agreement, or it might be a tax, corporate tax scheme like this. I'm not an economist, I should say that, but listening to Emil, and you made me think about Elinor Ostrom and the tragedy of the commons. And I think that's the background setting here, is really what happens when we don't act in a collectively rational way. And what we see now, finally, is that the world is coming together and acting in a collectively rational way, and that's a good thing coming from a European perspective. I like Star Wars. I'm not sure if everyone's doing that, but then you've seen The Mandalorian, the recent one, and they have this motto. They say, "This is the way." This is the way. And I would like to say that this is the way that we're looking at, because we need more of that. We need more of European and global tax coordination, not less. And the winners, it's going to be countries with ambitions, countries like Sweden, Countries with ambitions in welfare, welfare ambitions, with ambitions on the labor market, because what we also see is that in companies that pay taxes, they also bargain collectively. So no paying of taxes, less interest in collective bargaining. So this is the way. This is the way. You're not going to see this Mandalorian now without thinking about me saying this is the way. That's good. One could also discuss this from a moral perspective or an interest perspective, whether we should have companies that don't pay any taxes or very low taxes. I don't think it's a moral problem. I think it's a real interest problem, because these companies, our societies will not keep up together, because it's bad for workers, it's bad for companies at large, business society, it's bad for citizens, and it's only good for a very few group of men that like to fly to their own private jets. They're very good off. But apart from that, we're all bad off with companies that don't pay any taxes. ETUC have argued for a higher level of corporate taxes, 25%. But now I'm with a lot of people that are economists, so I'm comfortable to say this. 15% of something is always more than 100% of nothing. So I think that's good to carry in mind. But I do think that 15 we think that it's too low. It should be 25. And we'll see what the future carries. I want to finally end with I'm not sure if this is for the discussion, but I'll put it in now. We need less house cats too. Mm-hmm. And what do I mean with that? Well, house cats, they usually don't think that much about the environment that they're living in. They take the system for granted. And I do think that we have too many countries, too many states that don't take the system they're functioning and working within in a serious manner. So we need less house cats. We need cats that now gets out and do more of this kind of cooperation and create a world that we can live in together. And I would be very happy to see the Swedish politicians here, coming from a country with ambitions in the welfare state, getting on top of things and show the way. This is the way.
Thank you. And Severin, what do you think about this? Why is this harming workers when we...
Yes, thank you, Simon. Is it? Yeah, I think it's okay. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Severin Picard. I'm a lawyer. I'm also a trade unionist, and I'm the coordinator of a network of unions active on tax justice issues. This is a fairly recent network, which is growing very fast. We currently have 30 trade unions, member of that network, across 4 continents. We meet on a very regular basis to discuss tax advocacy or concerns about corporate tax avoidance and what to deal with this. And I'm very happy that the Swedish unions are part of this collective effort. So there is indeed a growing interest in corporate tax issue, because corporate tax avoidance, yes, it does harm workers, and it harms workers in many ways. Obviously, as we all know, corporate tax avoidance involves huge amounts of money. This has been said by Emil earlier on. Huge amount of money that could be used to have more balanced public budget, that could be used to finance our public services, and that could be used for redistributive policies that workers are calling for. But this is not the only way in which corporate tax avoidance harm workers. There are even more direct ways in which this affects us. So when I started working on corporate tax issues, people would often tell me, but it is in your interest, you as a worker, that your company pays less taxes, because if the company pays less taxes, there's more money in it for you, for the workers, right? In fact, this is not how it's working in practice. The way it's working is that you have 2 ways in which you can lower your tax bill as a corporation. One is that you reinvest your profits into capacities, into employment, into research and innovation, into good jobs. You reinvest your profits, you lower your tax bills. And that's what we trade unions want. But what is happening today with many large corporations is precisely the opposite. And the second way in which you're going to reduce your tax bill is you're going to shift your profits. You're going to shift your corporate profits to low tax jurisdiction, to tax havens. You're going to shift them in places where they are hidden and where they're going to benefit no one except from the shareholders. So in those companies that have aggressive tax planning, we see that there is very little liquidities left for the day-to-day sustainable business models. Even if workers contribute to a rather profitable way, even if the company itself is profitable and healthy, there is very poor financial accounts simply because the liquidities are taken out, and there is little money left on which we are going to bargain. So there is no magic money tree, we are often told, because there is no money left. But it's not because the company is not profitable or sustainable. It's because corporate tax avoidance regularly take all those profits out of those companies and take it away from where we are, the workforce. Also, and that's I think is very relevant for Sweden as a country with strong workers' participation rights, when we want to address the issue, negotiate with management, we can't. We can't because tax avoidance practices involve a series of letterbox practices and shell entities and super complex corporate group structures. And so when we want to talk to the person who's making the decision, that person is not here. So a Swedish trade union cannot negotiate with senior management because senior management is no longer in Sweden. We don't even know where it is. It's just hidden behind a layer of shell entities and all sort of artificial structure. So all this to say, and I think Claes Mikael, you said it as well, when you are a bad taxpayer, very often you are also a bad employer. When we make this point to our government officials asking for stronger corporate tax rules, what they're telling us is this very often. They say, I agree with you, you have a point, but my hands are tied. I cannot fix the corporate rules, I cannot increase the corporate tax rate, because if I do it, and I heard this morning again, if I do it, the capital, the corporations are going to flee to other countries. They're going to another member states, and ultimately, we're going to lose out as a country. Now, I'm sure we'll come back to this in the conversation. I think this link between tax competition and real investment is really questionable. But beyond that, this is the effort that we're making as a trade union movement when we set up this network of unions for tax justice across the 4 continents. We trade unions are now coordinating our messages and our policy advocacy activities so that each of us, when we address you, when we address your government representatives, we come to you with the same coordinated message across all countries. We need to fix the broken corporate tax rules. We want stronger rules, and we don't want this race to the bottom anymore. What we want is that we want a race to the top, a virtuous circle. I think that's how you economists call it. So we need more coordination and we need more ambition. 3 policy priorities for us. 1, tax transparency. It is no longer tenable that we do not know how much our corporations are earning in profits, where they are paying taxes, and how much taxes they are paying. We need to know this, to have this information, because this is essential for a collective bargaining strategy. And it's also quite essential to face companies with their responsibility. First demand, tax transparency. Second demand, Claes Mikael has said it, we want to have a 25% effective corporate tax rate. 15% is better than 0%, I get it, but it's still quite under the effective tax rate average for the OECD countries, which ranges between 20 and 25%. So with a 15% floor, you still have room for competition, but that's not the main issue. The main issue for us is that if a nurse, if an employee is paying 25% out of their wages in taxes, then it's quite fair that a corporation should pay at the very least 25% out of their corporate profits as well. And the third demand is that we believe that the current transfer pricing rules are one of the major reasons, not the only reason, but one of the major reasons for the problems that we have today. We think it doesn't make much sense that profits are taxed where the companies declare them. Corporate profits should be taxed where they arise, where economic value is created. And so we are demanding a deep rethinking of the current rules towards more unitary taxation. These are the 3 policy priorities we have as a movement. As I said, it's a global coordination that we're putting in place now, and hopefully we will have more of these events in various countries, in countries that matter for decision making, because we do need to increase our visibility. Corporate tax rule can no longer be, and I'm just going to finish with that, Simon, corporate tax rules can no longer be a niche issue. It can no longer be hijacked by a small group of tax advisors and corporations. There is a strong society interest in it. We need to know what we're talking about. Things don't have to be that complicated, Emil. The rules can be much easier to understand and to communicate. And that's why we're looking for in this network.
Thank you. Eleanor, what do you think?
Thank you for the invitation, first of all. I would like to start with taking a step back on why we need taxation in the first place and where we are right now. We are just coming out of the pandemic. We are facing a cost of living crisis. We have a geopolitical threat with the war in Ukraine that has shook Europe to its core. And we also have a climate crisis that is imminent. And all these issues demand financing. Demand financing for welfare, they demand financing for defense, and for climate investments. This forces political leaders to act. And I think we are in an interesting systemic shift here, where these institutions, the OECD, IMF, also the European Union, have been strong advocates of trickle-down economics not so long ago, pro-market, pro-business solutions. And this is actually a first step in a long time where we're seeing proposals put forward that profit workers rather than the executive boards and the corporate elites. So I think that whether I also agree on the percentage points, and we could also talk about the base that is included in this proposal, but it's an important step forward. And what this is really it's evening the playing field for companies. So you compete, both states and corporations can compete on products developments, on their services, rather than who has the most advanced tax scheme, or what state can offer the most attractive low taxation. And this also benefits an economy like Sweden, where we have a very educated population. We put a lot of money and resources into investments and capital-intensive products. So this is beneficial for us as an economy. So you shouldn't stare yourself blind on these revenue calculations for Sweden, because I think in evening out this playing field, this would benefit the Swedish economy as a whole. Another important point, which comes back to the financing needs in the European Union as a whole, is that we as an economy with low state budget and very strong fiscal rules, we are the ones that are bailing out rather than being bailed out in the European context. So when there's proposals like this put forward, which actually strengthens the financing through taxation rather than loans, which would increase deficits, not to mention in Southern European countries, Italy most acutely, that also means that the risk of Sweden having to bail out or pay higher membership fees through the European Union in the long run also decreases. So that's also an important point. It strengthens the financing needs also for Sweden in that sense. And there's also a lot of resources, I think, if you look at this from an academic perspective, that are spent now in companies to finding these tax schemes, which could actually be spent on trying to develop products instead. So I think from an academic worker's perspective, this is also good news. And I also want to underline what Severin is saying with the how we're seeing that corporations that are avoiding taxes, they are not the best employers either. So that's a very important point to make. And then, of course, that what the taxes finance, welfare, social services, education, which brings our countries together and strengthens equality, is obviously very important from a worker's perspective. So that's, I'll fill in the discussion, but I think this is a big step forward, and then we could talk about the base. We should tune up the percentage points, but it's going in the right direction.
Thank you, Eleanor. And Göran, please.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Emil, for a very interesting report, and thank you all for coming here today. Well, last week I was I had a birthday. I was 64 years old. So I'm perhaps
Congratulations.
one of the oldest here in the room. And of course, when you think back, you can see that the trends are shifting in the long run. And I'm very much a child of the Cold War. And when I was young, everything was regulated, very highly regulated. And then we saw the pendulum go to deregulations. But now in the environment that you were in, speaking about, Eleanor, with a war going on in Europe and with the pandemic that we just come out of, and we also see very high demands on the welfare systems all over Europe, I should say. And also with an economy with high inflation and cost crisis and energy crisis. Now I can see that the pendulum is coming back towards more regulations. And as you said earlier, much is said, but I think that have a level playing field for the companies is very good for the Swedish companies, because as you said also that we should compete on high quality products, high quality services, not where you have your tax, where you're paying your taxes. So I also think that this is a good idea. We can always discuss on the percentages. I think this is a good thing for Sweden. I think it's a good thing for the Swedish companies, and I also think it's a good thing for Swedish workers that this comes in place. As Emil said, this is not perfect. There are problems with such regulations, and my experience is that I have never seen new regulations making less work for experts in the companies. I always seen that there are new jobs for our members in big companies. Although I would agree on it would be better that they worked on better products instead of working on tax deviations. I have just one thing, could it be around for 15% if this comes in place? That all the European nations go for 15%, that would be a risk for the Swedish tax system, and we would have less revenues from companies. That could be a risk that I see. But on the whole, I think this is a good idea. I think it's a first step, but we have to do it to finance all that we need together. Welfare systems, defense, and we also need good working environment for our members. Thank you.
Thank you, Göran. And you're all very disciplined, so you've kept your time, which I'm very happy for as a moderator. And I think you asked the first question, Göran, for actually two politicians here. Will this be a raise to 15%? And I also ask you too, because we have some voices here saying that this is good, but it's really not enough. And what do you answer them? So Edward, if you're first out, please.
Of course, that's not. I can see that we will have a shift down to 15%. That's probably the case, but actually, it would be less difficult to see that in regard to some countries today have much lower corporate taxes. So the need to raise down to 15% may be less than today. But I think when you harmonize this corporate tax, there will be some shift down to 15%. I think we will see that. But we compete in a lot of things, both in the tax system and in the welfare system and the infrastructure for companies to put their businesses in a country. So you have income tax, for example, that will still be one factor between countries to compete with. You have VAT, of course, in the consumer part that will affect some of these things. And I tried to find the English word for aktieutdelningar.
Dividends.
Dividends. Yeah. Thank you. for taxation on the dividends. So you have a lot of things that are still not regulated that will affect where companies will have their headquarters and so on. So that's one thing. But another important issue is, of course, a welfare state has many advantages in regard to companies to have the worker force in a country with welfare state, and of course infrastructure from the physical one to the non-physical one. You have a low corruption, for example, in a country like Sweden. So all in all, this is a step forward, and I think Sweden will gain from this step forward, actually. So that's a good thing. But of course, we have a lot of problems. Even if you have some more members working with the bureaucracy in the companies, that's not a good thing, actually. But that will be one of the downside of this one.
I'm not totally convinced that a floor absolutely drives it down to the floor. I don't really see the logic in that, because you can see we have had a downshift in this taxation already before this. So what the possibility to actually gain is bigger in the recent system than the new system, because you could do even more gains by being an outlier in this to actually gain than capital or investments in your country. So I not see it's an absolute logic in that. I see in most European countries, not like Sweden actually, we have quite strong public finances. Most European countries don't, and struggle on the other hand to get the finance of their welfare state today. So now in the logic to actually going out of the pandemic, we have the price shock. To actually now for a politician in any countries to make that kind of priority before, if they should lower taxation, I think income tax would be higher on the agenda for a politician to get elected. So perhaps right now there is a different kind of logic that people are very pushed by the high prices, and that might be a higher priorities also for governments that have the possibility to decrease taxation. So I'm not certain that this will be the first taxation to pinpoint. But I must say that you have to get this done as well. We talk about that it's finished. To actually get the international agreement delivered, I think will be very important. So European has a leadership in this to actually make the decision to make it finalized, to see it does work and we fulfill our international obligations, and also put pressure on those who perhaps will hesitate or will slow down the process. I think Europe has a real challenge to actually deliver on this as well, to make other countries fulfill their promises on this. So, but some countries might want to lower their taxation, but they've done it before and they could do it again. But I don't think that there is a absolute logic that this should happen right now. I think the challenges for many countries are on different levels right now.
Thank you. So you both from the two big parties here in Sweden, and you're very much positive to this, I would say. But what the view from Brussels? I mean, Klaus-Michael, you hear Sweden's position in these negotiations over time. How has Sweden acted historically in these taxation issues? Do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, I'll start with just a comment on what you just said. I think it's interesting to see, because we talk about level playing field. I think Europe is very much about creating level playing fields in Europe. And when I arrived in Brussels 2 years ago, it was just at the startup of the TTC with the Americans, the Trade and Technology Council, which is a very important structure for creating level playing fields in a number of different areas. I'm not sure if taxes are involved actually, but no. So I think what we do matters, and that's what I reacted to, because it's not the given. If you have, let's say that you establish now like 15%, it's not the given if you go from that it should go to 15 from 25. Only if you decide so. So Edward, if you so want, then it's good. But then you should say that you want it to go down. That's another thing. But there's no natural law. There's no Newton's law that says that the apple will fall down to 15%. So just to be clear about that. If you want so, yes. But then one should say so. And because I don't think that companies are like Pavlov's dogs that just any little change in something will make. Some will do in some areas, but most companies they won't move. No, on taxes from in the Brussels context, what I understand and what I hear is that there is a bit strange. One would say that Sweden are not more engaged in tax issues, being one of the potential winners of having more tax coordination taking place in Brussels, creating more floors like this, also in other areas where one could see that one could avoid competition. So what I hear from colleagues in Brussels is a bit strange that Swedes are not more engaged in these issues. But now we have this seminar. It's a good start, and I do think from a European perspective, we hope to have more engaged Swedes in European affairs in general, but also in this area.
Yeah, so I had a reply from Edward and then Michael.
I had to provoke them a bit.
I did not say that there were the Swedish government's will to go down to 15%. But I think when you create the floor, there are actually, like Mikael Damberg said, less incentives to lower the taxes than today. And we see a lot of countries, like Mikael Damberg said, who need more taxes to do both in the welfare system and so forth. But always when you create a floor, you create something that will move towards the floor. That's all I say. But we will see in the future if that will be the case or not. And like I said earlier, you have not only the corporate tax that affect where companies put their headquarters and production and so on. There are a lot of things in the tax system that actually have the impact on the company's decision to do one thing or another. And we have other things that, for example, Sweden are beneficial from. We have a good welfare state, we have good infrastructure, low corruption, and so on. And all of these things are also things that corporates have to take in consideration when they put their headquarters in the production. So I didn't say that the government's agenda is to lower the tax for the corporate tax, but I think we might see raise down to 15% in Europe, but we will see.
Okay.
The future will tell.
Thank you.
May I answer the other question? How has the Swedish government acted in Brussels when it comes to taxation? I think it's important to understand that this is also a historic legacy of our entry into the European Union, how we see our welfare state and the possibility to decide on our own for taxation. Sometimes Swedes are a bit annoyed that Southern European countries always think that Europe can solve all their questions. If you want a welfare system, you have to convince your citizens that they should pay taxes. Someone will have to pay taxes. And that's why we think that if Europe decides on taxes above our head and we're not involved, they might decide on taxation that are not perfectly matched on the Swedish economy. Then we have harder to defend the taxes to the citizens. If the taxation is done in a bad way, we can have a kind of dangerous discussion that Brussels had decided to do this, but it's not smart for us. So I think still there is argument for us to have the decision on taxation on the national level. But in some cases, when it comes to the single market, when it comes to tax evasion, there are logics that sometimes you should go together and make decisions at a whole in European Union, but not on everything on taxation, because then we say that Europe should decide on our welfare state. And that's a big discussion for Sweden to take, because we have higher ambition than most European countries when it comes to financing the welfare state. And if we let Europe decide on taxation, and we feel they make the wrong decision, then it will be harder to uphold the welfare system. But I understand there is a kind of both sides on this, because I do agree, tax evasion, the single market, then there might be arguments for joint action, but not in all taxation questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, you wanted to respond.
Yes, well, I mean, this issue is really about who is to pay for these needs that we identify as society, and how should we share the financing burdens. And as of now, workers are seeing real wages declining, and at the same time, they are in percentage of their income paying, contributing the most to these welfare systems that also benefit the corporations. I mean, they get educated workforce, they get paid sick insurance, and as in the Swedish case, hospital care, schools that they, as corporations, don't have to pay for because that is included in the welfare system. So corporations get huge benefits from the welfare system without contributing enough, especially not in comparison to workers. And I think it is also important to say that we're not solving the problem of tax evasion through making the absolute most profitable multinational companies pay at a minimum 15% tax. That's like it's a, how do you say, hygien factor, a hygienic sanitary factor. So that's something that's important to say. And I think the real issue of tax evasion is that in between, and Emil touched upon this when he presented his report, is between income and profits and the shifting of employments into private companies. And that is a real issue in Sweden also. And I look forward to you, Edward Riedel, to face this issue with the 312 rules, for example, which is really creating a race to the bottom, and also making it very profitable to go from being an employed doctor, for example, to being a private company. And I would also say that this potential risk of a race to the bottom and viewing these 15% as a ceiling rather than a floor, I mean, that is political. And I would say that most countries are going in these discussions with the ambition of raising tax revenue rather than the opposite in light of these financing needs. And I also here look forward to Edward Riedel and the government to be a positive force in these discussions, as just a year ago you were opposed to this issue in the Swedish parliament. So I'm very happy to see this shift, because it's important to realize these financing needs that we have, not to least in the defense sector.
Thank you. Severin, we had some EU debate here with some energy.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to thank Elinor for making the case about equity between what a worker pays in taxes on its wages and what corporations are paying. It's a very extremely important point to keep in mind in our debate. And very quickly on the issue of tax sovereignty, I think we have to be careful of perhaps oversimplifying things, which I tend to do as a trade unionist, but still, when it comes to corporate tax, Sweden would precisely lose its tax sovereignty by not coordinating the rules at European level and international level, because multinational enterprises do not know any border. So if Sweden is not part of a coordinated effort, then Sweden is going to lose its say as to where and how much their corporation should be paying taxes. So it's precisely the Europeanization of the topic that's going to save, if I may say, it's going to save Swedish tax sovereignty. On the potential race to the bottom to 15%, I'm not convinced it's going to happen. I think what the minimum tax is going to do is to reduce the intensity of profit shifting. So you would have profit shifting still, but within, let's say, a more defined framework. But what I'm worried about is that tax havens are going to rely on other type of incentives to continue attracting capital. I think we are starting to see that in some EU tax havens. So we have to be quite vigilant here. It's not just about corporate tax, it's a whole philosophy as to what type of tax systems do we want, and is it really the tool that we want to attract capital? So just be careful, not narrowly focus on the 15% rate. Also see what type of behavioral response governments are going to put in place to try to compensate for this rise in minimum tax rate. And the third point I want to make, I'm the only one in this panel to say this, I think, but I'm going to have to say it. 15% with a narrow tax base is not enough. You need to go more. So this directive is one first step, but already now there is room to go beyond that and to be more ambitious. So yes, transpose the directive. I understand there is a limited room of maneuver for transposition, ambitious transposition. There is a bit of room of maneuver to be more ambitious in the Swedish domestic legislation. But there is huge room of maneuver in complementary measures that you should be putting in place in parallel to the directive, because we want to have a minimum tax that guarantees at least a 25% effective tax rate. Even 20% is good enough. You're going to see the raise in revenues go through the roof with a 20% effective tax rate. So think about those national measures that can be put in place already today as a complement to the minimum tax. Think about strengthening your CFC rules. Think about the QDMTT, for instance. Why do we have to have a QDMTT at 15%? Why not be more ambitious and have it at 25%? And I'm using acronyms that nobody understands, but my point here is that there is room today to be more ambitious. Don't go to the lowest point always, because we're just never going to get out of this debate. The idea of having national countries issuing more ambitious measures already now. I'm looking at my friend at the OECD here. You're going to like what I'm going to say. The idea with having national countries enacting more ambitious measures now is that this is going to build pressure on the multilateral system for a next agreement that's going to be stronger than the Pillar 2 that you have today. And that's what we want. We already need to aim for the next step. So to my OECD friends, two things. One, I think you should talk to your unions about your working conditions. And two, there is a lot of work for you to do. And it's not time to take holidays, because this Pillar 2 is just the first step of a long road ahead of us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just to come back a little bit on this, so from a EU perspective, and I think it's again very similar to what you find within a trade union, is that if you share power, you will get more power. It's very strange. You give something, you think you give something, but you actually get more by giving or sharing power. And I think that also goes for tax cooperation on the European level. It gives higher capacity. And then I want to go back to the United States again with the Inflation Reduction Act that you probably heard about. Big investment in green technology, clean energy, and many other issues. You also know that a big chunk of that package is financed by this cooperation, the tax that we're talking about, help me, I lost the word now. Global minimum taxation. So that's money bringing in right into the system in America to transform the American society, and it has also consequences for us in Europe, and we're now also starting to finance. I want to end my intervention here by going back to what Göran said, that in the 70s, big state capacity and so on. Our time is very similar in that way that they also had high inflation at that time, energy crisis, and the reaction at that time was less regulation, less state, more markets. I think when we look at our time and our future here, it's going to be the very opposite. We're going to have less markets, more regulation, more state. One might not like it, but that's what's going to happen, I'm afraid. So this is the way. This is the future. We need more of this. I really think that this is the way forward. So
I like it.
yes. Yes.
Edward, you wanted to?
Yeah, something Eleanor Orberg told everybody in the room that the moderate party were against these things, and then you have to remember all of the things that were discussed from the beginning. If we talk about the second pillar, who is now on the table, it's not all. It's not done. All the negotiations. So some questions are still out, and hopefully during this year we will see everything in the new legislation. So the corporate tax, that's a good thing. That will create a level playing field for countries to attract companies. But there are a lot of things that are discussed among different countries that could affect Sweden and Swedish entrepreneurship and companies negative. We have countries with large populations and small or non-existing tech sectors and value-added processes in the industry and so on. And that will be a problem, of course, if we are shifting the taxation to where products are consumed in a large number. So of course we have countries with large population that would rather want that shift to take place, and there are a lot of downsides in that regard if we put on that way. So you can agree in general that something has to be done, but different countries have different agendas. Remember that. So you can actually lose a race if you try to do a lot of things together. And I think Mikael Damberg had a lot of good remarks on that we actually want higher taxes in Sweden than a lot of other countries, because we have more ambition in welfare system, in infrastructure, and so on. So of course we don't want to have all the taxes in that regard. So that's a lot of things that you have to take in consideration, not just the second pillar, who is not actually finished yet. So.
Thank you.
Well, I think that when we are in these difficult times, challenging times, one thing that EU states could provide is stability and hope. And I think that's very important, that people in Europe, in Sweden, other countries feel that we have a stable base on which we are working on. And I think that is very important also for the corporates, because if they don't know what's going to happen the next day or the next year, they will be very worried and they won't put money in that country. So I think stability and hope is two things that we have to provide in these difficult times. And I only think that that could be done by the states and, for that matter, also by EU. I think that's really important.
Thank you. Eleanor?
Yes, all I can say is it didn't look great when it was Sweden and Poland that were the only countries that were opposing the global minimum taxation due to the parliamentary resistance. But I'm happy that the proposal put forward that we have a big majority for that. I think it's important also to not mix apples and pears in this debate. There's always going to be risks with any proposals. There will be interest in the European Union to have a more of a federal European Union, whether or not we implement this minimum taxation or not. So obviously political forces with different agendas will always try to use windows of opportunities. But that doesn't take out the advantages of implementing this. And I think this is more about the fact that capital is global, therefore we need to set global norms and rules to be able to tax these corporations. Otherwise, that's tax revenue that is lost and going into the private jets that Klaus-Mikael Ståhl was talking about in your introduction. So rather than seeing this as a principal idea of the EU being sort of the chief of taxation rather than the national states. This is about solving a problem that is global, and then you need global solutions to that problem. And that's exactly what the European Union and international corporations and institutions are there for, solving these global problems that we can't solve ourselves.
Thank you.
Just to echo what Eleanor said, because we have a global problem and there need to be both global answers and some European answers to this. And I think what you mentioned before, we cannot reduce the discussion on tax evasion or just to this question, because what Europe and the international players are doing when it comes to tax havens, when it comes to the blacklist, when it comes to also get transparency into this, it's perhaps even bigger in the long run to actually to fix a global problem here. So we shouldn't just focus on this one, but my response when it comes to taxation was that we have a principle that taxation is a national issue, and that has our historic reason, but also our ambition on the welfare state in Sweden. So that's why we don't always jump when people in Europe say taxation on a European level. But sometimes we should. And this case, I think, is a good case. There are clear arguments for this. and there might be other areas where we see relevant arguments for it. But just to explain to our European friends that sometimes Sweden has a different history here, and that's not because we don't like taxation. On the contrary, we like taxation and we want to have an effective taxation system, and that's a basis of our political ambitions. Now it sounds like we're all agreeing here on the political scale on taxation. We usually don't in a national discussion, but still on this issue, I feel good that the political debate has shifted, as Eleanor says. There was some hesitation now, but there seemed to be a broad agreement on this, and that's good for a Swedish economy going forward.
So can I ask follow up? If we are more ambitious now, how can we move forward and also be more ambitious in this issue? Can we be that, as Severin is asking?
I think we can be more if we see as you said, there might be different ways of handling this now new taxation regulation, other ways of finding loopholes, finding new taxation systems as a kind of contraction of this. Then we should look into this, because the idea of this was create a good playing field for everyone. So I think there might be different areas, but I don't know exactly which areas there are that are on the table right now. But for us, I think most of the political debate again is also national. You have to find ways to argue with your population that taxation is actually smart, that you gain from a common system when it comes to education, healthcare, or whatever infrastructure investment. If you lose that argument, I'm sorry to say, I don't think Europe will help you to win the argument in the long run. So this is a kind of national responsibility. If you want to build a functioning welfare system that actually fit for purpose in this age where you need more education, you need more resources for the green investments, then you have to argue also to get the money to the state. And that's also a national argument. But sometimes international cooperation can really help. And I think we should be very firm on this. And we should look that the Swedish government now continues to fight tax evasions and tax frauds, because I think that's a very important question.
Thank you. So, Klaus Michael, we hear that there's a shift. It's more ambition. Do you get your hopes up?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
No, but what I hear now is not what I've heard before. Now I'm talking a little bit like a Swede here. That's been black or white, either or. There's no cooperation on taxes. Now I hear nuances. I hear that there are areas where it's profitable, and that's the way one should understand the European Union as well. It's something that creates a capacity to do things together, to solve problems together, solve the problems of the nation state. I mean, nation states without the European Union today would be lost. And there are two types of member states in the European Union. Those that understand that they are not big enough by themselves, and those that have not yet understood that. Those are the two types of member states that you get. And I do think when one gets towards the area of taxation, I think one has to give up a little bit of this previous religious understanding that has been that there's nothing to discuss here. So, but I hear a lot of good things here from a European perspective, and one shouldn't be that afraid of those that want to do more. The problem is those that don't want to do anything. That's much more problematic.
And Severin, as a non-Swede, do you get your hopes up?
I'm a traditionalist. I'm optimistic in my DNA. So, always go forward. That's what I say. I think the English have a saying, which is the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So I also get those positive vibes as Klaus gets, but I would really want to have those positive vibes translated into Sweden actually putting forward proposals that are going to inspire other member states to follow that lead. So far what I see, and that's not specific to Sweden, so far what I see is the other way around, is countries trying the way on how to evade, how to bypass the minimum tax. I want to see one country doing precisely the opposite, and that will be the beginning of a race to the top. And I just want to echo what Mr. Dunberg has said. Yesterday, we had a meeting with some comrades in Latin America. There is a huge momentum for corporate tax reform, or in general, progressive tax reform in Latin America. And we as trade union were wondering, as we are today, what can we do to push this agenda forward? And the response was precisely what you said. First, you go into the street and you win the people. It's first a class struggle. When you win the class struggle, the rules are going to follow. So it's not just on you, government, it's also on you, the trade unions, and on me, to go and explain to those workers bad taxpayers are bad employers.
Thank you. And we are approaching an hour, but I think the complexity we have touched a bit here. And it's very difficult, as Emil has said, to even understand this issue, which is a problem in itself. Because if you're one of the people, if you're a citizen who actually wants to be involved in this or understand it, it's very difficult. Does it have to be like that? I mean, now I turn to the politicians. That's a problem from our point of view, that no one can understand this, and many people are scared of this. So do you have any reflection on this?
I don't think tax legislation will ever be simple. That's not the case, but I think the arguments for a minimum floor of corporate taxation is simple. It's not that difficult to understand 15%. It is quite simple. So sometimes when we talk about an issue, we can make it simple, but in the details, there will always be very complicated things. I don't think we should fool ourselves. It is complicated. Try to understand everything about taxation is a full-time job.
I'm sorry this debate was quite boring, because we are in a lot of things we think like Swedes rather than politicians from right or left. We have a lot of things we are not agreeing on, and we have a vivid debate in Sweden in regard of that, of course. But when it comes to these matters, I think even if we try, we will not be able to have a vivid debate on the different issues in this regard. There are no proposals from the Social Democrats, as I have seen, for higher corporate tax in Sweden. And there are no proposals from the moderate part or the government to lower the corporate tax. And I think there will be a lot of things that we have to take in consideration when it comes to the details. That when you make these changes with the new legislations, and we do not know everything yet, but there will be some sub-optimizing and so on in regard to the details in the legislation. And that could create a problem, even if we think we are agreeing with other countries about the corporate tax floor. So there will be a lot of other things that we will have to discuss and debate before we are done with this. And sub-optimizing could actually be quite negative for Sweden, for example. In a lot of ways, we have a tech sector, we have a quite advanced industry, and so on. And we have a lot of things that we will have, and I think we will be agreeing on 99.9% with the Social Democrats in regard of those things. Perhaps we could manage to find some differences in that regard. I'm not sure, but in the whole, I think we will have Swedish companies, Swedish competitiveness, and Swedish economic growth in the cross for this. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
You wanted to ask
I have
something?
Eleanor, and then I have a last word for Göran, and then
Yes,
we are
I will
done.
release the microphone.
This is now when I just put a torch on the debate table for you. No, I'm not going to do that. But I just finish where I started, where I think this is the first step of a systemic actually shift in the view of the state responsibilities and also the obligations for corporations and the global elite to contribute to our welfare ambitions. I realize one needs to be pragmatic when it comes to the percentage and the base, because it's obviously a balancing act between getting as many countries on board as possible and actually getting a proposal through, and then one might have to compromise on the percentage and going a bit lower than one would have wanted from the beginning, and the same with what type of corporations that are included. But I think if we put this in place, then the ambition should be to get it up to 25%. I agree on that, but also not forget the base when we talk about the percentage points. Luxembourg, for example, has a higher corporate tax than Sweden, but a much less revenue from it, because there's so many exceptions and loopholes. So it's not all about the percentage. It's also about the implementation and compliance to the percentage that is decided. But thank you very much for the invitation and a good discussion.
Two final remarks then. I think when we're talking about transparency on the taxation system, I think that's important. It can't be seen in every detail, as you said, Mikael. I remember the great reform in the beginning of the 90s, when I think that people in Sweden for the first time actually understood why they paid a certain amount of money in taxes. And I think that made people more willing to pay taxes. And they stopped speaking about how to avoid taxes very much. And I think that is an important thing. You should understand why you pay taxes. So I think that transparency is important, and that the systemics are easy for corporates and for individuals to understand. I think that's important. The other thing is that in every organization, if it's a union, if it's a corporate, if it's a country, or if it's EU, there's always a discussion of where should the decisions be taken. And I think that the answer is never clear, but the discussion always has to be going on, because some decisions are better taken on a higher level, if you use that expression, and some decisions are better taken on a lower regional, local level. And I think that this discussion that we have had today has shown that we need to discuss these matters, because, as you said, Claus Mikael, there have been religions about this. And some are religious that everything should be decided on the EU level, and some are religious that nothing should be decided upon on EU level. And I think that we have to start to discuss these things, because I think that the truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. So thank you very much for taking part of this discussion, and thank you all of you who have created the work that has led forward to it. So with that.
Yes, thank you for a very good panel discussion. And for all of you listeners out there, at 12:30 we will continue this this seminar with 3 excellent presentations. So I hope you will be back then.